Welcome to the memory world. I'm going to show you all of the memory techniques ever to exist and put them into a tier list. Alright? And, memory can be tricky. There's lowest tier, there's low tier, mid tier, high tier, highest tier. Many different memory veterans use different types of memory techniques, maybe use all of them simultaneously in certain ways, but it really depends on us. How we associate new information that are presented to us, for example, in the educational world, in school, in college, in professional school. How we're going to use these techniques and prove to be efficient in the professional world. Now, there are tiers to these, and I'll tell you my input on each of these. So first, we have, let's see. So this is the major technique. This is the Russian doll technique. Memory palace, mnemonic, memory journey, blunt force, Dominic system, as well as verbatim, memory verbatim, peg system, and chaining memory palaces. So now, let's begin with the major system. So major system, what do you guys think? Up, maybe D, C, A, S. So S is the highest tier. Okay, and out of all of these, I think that in my opinion, through past experiences, I would say that major system is one of those basic, fundamental memory technique that we should all be aware of, because it's essentially an idea of associating numbers with letters. So I would consider this a mid tier. I would say B tier. But what about the Russian doll? Well, if you guys don't know already, the Russian doll technique is where you essentially put an image on an image, and when you zoom in on the image, you'll notice another image. So you're associating a new item, a new piece of information into another item that's presented in that item as you zoom in into that item. I hope that makes sense. So like the idea of a Russian doll, you open the Russian doll and you see something inside of it. It will be a different object, maybe an actor performing a certain action. And so that's what the Russian doll technique is, but I would consider this also probably within the span of, I would probably do kind of high mid tier. Well, actually, this is a high tier. Yeah, I would say Russian doll is a pretty complicated technique, really, because you have to really possibly use a memory journey through the Russian doll experiment, because you are essentially zooming in to a new item, and if you somehow use a character that can, I guess, go through a journey into another area of that item, you can somehow make a journey out of it, making more associations for you, allowing you to incorporate this new piece of information into your long-term memory. So Russian doll, I'd say that's a solid A. It wouldn't be a B. I say that this major system is pretty important. Not exactly very difficult to master though. So I'm going to think about the major system still in B, maybe C. I gotta think about this. So memory palace. So you guys probably know about memory palace, the idea of using a loci, a room that you're familiar with. You're walking around that room in a maybe clockwise or counterclockwise fashion, allowing you to memorize a whole story that's so exaggerated that you just have to remember it through a certain storyline in that actual palace, in that actual room. And so basically the multiple method of loci, just using spatial memory and using a storyline, you can memorize the actual place, the actual storyline associated with that place, allowing you to memorize a lot of information. It can be a sequential event of maybe 6, 7. Sometimes people put in even like 20 kind of steps into the storyline. So this technique is actually very nice. I would consider this to be a pretty high tier. Okay, and so I would agree with this, just because with the Russian doll you use a memory journey, and I would agree that a memory journey would be a high tier aspect. Russian doll, I say it's very complicated. I mean, it can be simple, but you want to make it as elaborative as possible for you to actually remember what you're doing. And so mnemonics, I would say probably D, C. I would put this more so in the C section because mnemonics do have some sort of association, and it can be elaborative, it can be complicated, it can be very helpful for many of us. You know, a lot of people in professional schools and graduate schools, in college as well as high school, they go through their classes getting A's with just mnemonics. I think that most of us just go through school with just mnemonics. I don't think many of us have heard of any of these other techniques like major system, peg system, Dominic system, memory journey, and the idea of chaining memory palaces. And so let's move on with the journey. So the memory journey. So memory journey, I would say it's going to be in the A stage, in the actual kind of the high to highest tier, because you know the idea of memory journey, I would say it's kind of similar to memory palace, the ideology behind it, just because you know you're kind of going through a sequential set of events that allow you to possibly remember the storyline, because you know in memory journeys you can think of like maybe a video game where you're doing a first person point of view. You're walking through a place, you know what's going to happen next, assuming that you beat the game already, for example. And you know, like I know you've been through maybe a video game of maybe The Legend of Zelda where you know possibly what happens next. You're fighting a boss eventually, and then you're saving your Zelda. Okay, so now we have this hammer. This is a blunt item, so this is called blunt force. And blunt force is no doubt the lowest tier technique ever to exist. And that's the idea of viewing material without the use of any memory technique and praying that you'll remember it when the time comes. So basically, maybe through repetition, you're just like looking at the flashcard repetitively, but you don't really make any associations with it. You just try to use your short-term memory to memorize that new piece of information that you've learned in class. And so this is kind of like those pressure style kind of learning where you're trying to study the day before, hoping that you'll remember that piece of information for the exam the next day. So this is most likely the worst thing to ever do in school. And a lot of people, they do this. They do, you know, stay up late at night the day before to just memorize as much as they can. Sometimes I'm guilty of it because, you know, there's just so much information in pharmacy school, for example, that I can't even utilize the other memory techniques because maybe I'm not creative at that point of time because there's so much pressure. So I'm basically using Anki to, you know, make as many flashcards as I can, go through them through spaced repetition, but this is blunt force. There's no associations. If there's even a little bit of association at all, it would be considered some form of mnemonic. And so blunt force is terrible. Now, next up we have Dominic. So Dominic system is the idea of associating numbers with people. Okay, I would say that this is something you can use instead of the major system. They're both kind of similar, except remember the major system associates numbers with letters, while this ideology with the Dominic system uses numbers with people. Okay, now sure, you can know both the Dominic system and the major system, no problems with that, because you know these are entirely different kind of ideas and really items that you can memorize. Maybe you can associate a number with words. Also, that number and word can be associated with the same certain person that you're familiar with. Okay, so it's definitely it can get very sophisticated, very complicated, but I think that I do have some form of Dominic system later on in life, but I more so focused on the major system and the peg system. And so the peg system, moving on to the peg system, it's kind of mid-tier as well, I would say. So it's actually the idea of associating numbers with words. If I said major system was associated with words, I'm sorry. I meant to say that the major system associates numbers with letters. Okay, the peg system associates numbers with words, and then the Dominic system is what associates the numbers with people. And so if you were to somehow have a whole system combining all three of these, that would be awesome. I do have a previous video where I actually merged the peg system and the major system together to associate not only numbers with the words, but also those words with the actual letters that are associated with the numbers as well. And so I would consider all of these to be middle tiers, probably great fundamental techniques for you to master before reaching the higher tiers. And so first we have blunt force at the bottom, mnemonic. Then we have major system, peg system, Dominic system. And then moving forward, we have the memory journey, which is probably the easiest to learn out of all the A tier techniques. Then we have memory palace. And then we have the Russian doll. So assuming that you probably master a lot of the other tiers, you can possibly use the Russian doll technique very effectively. In my honest opinion, as a memory veteran, I think that by having a good understanding and a mastery over all of these techniques, you can be a great judge at what kind of techniques to use when you are in school, when you're in classes. When you are being taught certain material, you get to think right on the spot on what techniques will be the best option for you as you are trying to memorize this kind of information for your long-term memory. Because once you go through a certain technique onto a new piece of information, you may not want to change that again because it may ghost yourself. It may interrupt your creative process, the process of you associating one item with another piece of information, like a person, an action, a place, etc. And so moving on, let's think about the textbooks here. So this is called textbook verbatim technique. It's a technique that's kind of modified by Anthony Metivier as well as Hutska from the Memory World Discord server. And this is the idea that you're just memorizing all the words in a page in a proper order through the use of combined memory techniques from low tier, mid tier, and high tier. So basically, through the simultaneous use of all memory techniques, you are incorporating the use of acronyms, okay, so mnemonics, okay, maybe some major system, peg system, Dominic system. You're merging all of these systems together so that you can remember word by word on textbooks, okay, saying it word by word without looking at the textbook at all. So this takes intense concentration, intense use of your time as you are implementing all of these techniques into how you're presenting that information when you're forced to kind of memorize maybe the Pledge of Allegiance, or maybe Pledge of Allegiance is probably too easy, but I'm talking about stuff that requires maybe like pages and pages worth of memorization. I don't think that any of us would probably be forced to do anything like that in school, but when the time comes, I think these are for more of memory enthusiasts. The textbook verbatim technique is more so for people who want to really show off, to really brag and show off their mastery of their current knowledge of memory techniques. Incorporate all of that together and see what you can do. Because I think that I don't think I have mastery over the textbook verbatim memory technique, despite learning about memory techniques for over 3 years already. I think that memory techniques are very, very complicated, can be very elaborative, and can be time consuming. So I think of memory as a luxury. Comprehension is the most important aspect in school. Understanding the concept before you memorize is the key points that I want to convey to all of you as students. Now, textbook verbatim, definitely the master tier, the S tier, highest tier that you can imagine, because this is so difficult. Now, Anthony Metivier kind of had a kind of system that made it kind of easier for us to really have a form of textbook verbatim. The idea of just knowing what information is in one chapter, from chapter 1 to the last chapter. So knowing key points in each chapter through the use of a flashcard that has, chapter 1 with all your paraphrased wording, and then modifying all of those words in the index card, making it very, very coherent and understandable to you, so that when the time comes, you can summarize what is in chapter 1 versus what is in chapter 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. So that's Anthony Metivier's way. Hutska's way is basically to use an acronym. To use basically an acronym and then combine a lot of memory palaces with those acronyms to force you to remember characters doing a certain action at a certain place. You chain that place into another memory palace, maybe to another memory journey in a video game, and then you chain it back to maybe somewhere in church, maybe somewhere in school, in a certain classroom, in a certain place, maybe at a certain time, using gustations, using all of your senses, so your smell, your auditory, visuals, and as well as a lot of the other senses that you have, so that you can really enhance your experience while learning all of these techniques into textbook verbatim. Now, that's probably a mouthful. I want to move on to this chain. So this is the idea of chaining memory palaces. So I would say that this is probably S tier because you are merging or combining the ideas of memory palaces to another memory palace. And I would say that this step is probably required before you actually reach the idea of textbook verbatim. The idea of chaining memory palaces, you can imagine that when you have a place that has all of your micro stations and your macro station, you are in fact going through a very, very exaggerated storyline, but you want to continue that storyline so you can remember a lot of other events that are sequential to that current piece of information. And so as you are progressing, you can chain that memory palace to another memory palace that could be somehow connected, or you can make it completely obscured, but you know that the storyline has to continue somehow. It has to have a part 2, maybe going into a place that involves the TV show Futurama, and then going into Family Guy somehow because maybe the robot guy in Futurama is trying to attack Stewie Griffin because Stewie Griffin maybe came from the future, destroyed the robot guy somehow, because maybe the one-eyed Cyclops had a baby with someone else, cheating on somebody else. It's a lot of different aspects in your mind as you are associating a lot of these stories together. And so you're chaining these memory palaces together. It could be through a journey format. It kind of sounds like a journey format based on what I was saying, based on the story that I just presented to you. So it can be a mix of journeys and memory palaces when they are chained together. And then when you chain them together, that's going to allow you with the more mastery before you can actually reach the actual crazy tier, the textbook verbatim tier. And so these are all of the memory techniques that are presented to you. I think that blunt force is always going to be terrible. I know that a lot of people use this, and they can use like Quizlet, for example, to just go through flashcards without thinking about the actual associations that you can have behind it. I know that blunt force can work out because it also includes the idea of comprehension, that you understand what that idea is about, and that you can just, splurge out your memory into a piece of paper repetitively to the point where you can eventually reach some form of long-term retention. So blunt force is possible. I'm just saying that it does help to have some form of association at all, and somehow. And then mnemonics, great system. I mean, you can do anything with mnemonics. You can make an acronym and then make it stand for this, and that, like Roy G. Biv with the frequency versus wavelength in chemistry. Or you can use the one knapsack that I presented back in the previous lecture on chemistry solubility rules. But then, when you reach these levels, these from D to C and then to B, you start to realize that, it starts to click. These memory ideas can be combined, can be associated with each other as you kind of approach a new piece of information that eventually when you go to your classes, you can think about these memory techniques. You can use them on the spot while you are learning in class. Now, remember, like I said, memory is a luxury. You can only do it when you have the actual time to do it, because I know that back in the past, I used memory techniques before, memory palace before, but I still use it every day. I'm just saying that when I first used memory palaces, it took me around 5 to 6 hours to actually create my first memory palace. And then eventually, as time goes on, I was able to create around 30 memory palaces in a single night. So it really depends on you, your experiences, how you become more novel with your experiences in life. So when you go travel, to the world, around the world, you are approaching a lot of different places that you've never seen before. And so what I would encourage is to really take pictures, a 360 picture of places that you see are very unique. Okay, so that you can form these memory palaces, associate those pictures with maybe many images of characters from movies, from anime, from TV shows,